Have you ever had a dream so disturbingly vivid that, even after waking up, you felt its presence lingering around you, as if it had latched onto your soul? My name is Ethan Mordain. I've spent years investigating the paranormal, searching for the truth behind the eerie and the inexplicable, capturing stories that could make even the most skeptical person question their reality. But what I'm about to share with you isn't just another story from the shadows. It's something that happened to me, and it still keeps me awake at night. It began with a dream so real, so suffocating, that it blurred the lines between nightmare and reality. Imagine being pulled into a world that feels like it shouldn't exist, a place where every sight, every sound, every touch feels as tangible as the waking world. That's exactly how it was for me. I found myself in a narrow hallway that stretched endlessly, lit only by the flickering light of a single bulb, which cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets just beyond the edge of my hearing. The walls were stained with something dark, something that looked like it had seeped through the wallpaper from within. The smell of mold and decay clung to the air, thick and suffocating, as if whatever had happened there had left its mark long after it was over. As I stood there, a cold chill ran down my spine, a feeling that something was watching me from the darkness, lurking just beyond the range of my vision. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to wake up, but my feet moved forward, almost as if they were no longer under my control. Each step echoed through the hallway, a dull, hollow sound that seemed to resonate far beyond what the narrow space should allow. And then I noticed it, a door. It was a simple wooden door, old and warped, with its paint peeling in long, brittle strips. Something about it felt wrong, profoundly out of place, as though it was never meant to be there, as though it was never meant to be seen. When I blinked, it vanished, only to reappear a few feet ahead. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The door seemed to call to me, an insidious pull that I couldn't resist. It was the kind of fear that felt primal, a deep, gut-wrenching terror that whispered that whatever lay behind that door wasn't meant for the living. And yet, despite the dread clawing at my insides, I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved almost of its own accord, fingers trembling as they reached for the tarnished brass knob. The metal was ice-cold to the touch, and as soon as my skin made contact, the entire hallway seemed to shift. The flickering light dimmed, the walls seemed to close in, and a low, almost imperceptible hum began to resonate from somewhere deep within the structure. It was as though the building itself was alive, aware, and I was its unwelcome guest. Before I take you further into this nightmare, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because the stories I share here aren't just meant to scare. They're warnings. Warnings of things that lie in wait just beyond our perception. Things that, once they find you, may never let you go. This isn't just a tale. It's a piece of a much darker puzzle, one that I've been trying to piece together ever since that night. It all began on what seemed to be an ordinary night, a night like any other, where exhaustion tugged at my eyelids, and I drifted into sleep, unaware of the darkness waiting for me. The dream carried me to a place I had never seen before, yet something about it felt disturbingly familiar, like a memory long buried in my subconscious. I found myself in an abandoned mansion, the air thick with the scent of rot and aged wood. Moonlight filtered through cracked windows, casting strange patterns on the floor, as if the light itself was unsure of what it had stumbled upon. The mansion was colossal, with corridors that twisted and turned, leading to places that defied logic. The walls were adorned with faded portraits, faces that seemed to follow me with their hollow eyes, judging me, silently warning me of something I couldn't quite grasp. As I ventured deeper, a strange chill settled in my bones, and an unnatural silence enveloped the place, broken only by the faint, rhythmic dripping of water echoing from somewhere deep within the house. Each drop reverberated, a heartbeat of the abandoned structure, a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I could smell something else beneath the scent of decay, something metallic, something that turned my stomach as soon as I recognized it. Blood. It was faint but unmistakable, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the horrors of past tragedies. I moved cautiously, my feet sinking into the plush but moldy carpet, each step a struggle against the feeling that the mansion wanted to consume me whole. And then there was the sound, a distant creaking, like footsteps in the darkness, something or someone moving just beyond my field of vision. My heart pounded as I turned a corner, and there it was, the door. Unlike the rest of mansion, it looked new, untouched by the decay that infested every other inch of the place. Its dark wood gleamed, and there was an ornate carving on its surface, a symbol that seemed to writhe and shift whenever I tried to focus on it, a pattern that felt both alien and familiar at the same time. It was then that I felt a sense of déjà vu so intense that it nearly knocked me off my feet. I had been here before. I knew this door, though I had no memory of how or why. A shiver ran down my spine as I approached, the cold emanating from the door contrasting sharply with the suffocating, stale air of the hallway. My fingers brushed against the surface, and a shock of ice shot up my arm, making me recoil. The door seemed to pulse, as if alive, as if aware of my hesitation. I could hear whispers now, soft, insistent, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, urging me to open the door, to step through into whatever lay beyond. Suddenly, the air grew heavier, and the sense of being watched became almost unbearable, as though 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed upon me. I glanced over my shoulder, but the corridor behind me was empty. At least, it seemed empty. Shadows moved in the corners, shifting with a will of their own, taking on shapes that almost resembled human figures before melting back into darkness. I turned back to the door, and it was slightly ajar now, though I had not touched it. A thin sliver of light escaped from the gap, an eerie, pulsating glow that seemed to beckon me closer, promising both answers and horrors I was not ready to face. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the smell of blood intensified, almost choking me. My hand moved once more, trembling as it reached for the door, the sense of inevitability crushing my chest. I knew, in that moment, that this was not just a dream. It was something far worse, something that had its claws in me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The door was not simply a passage. It was a threshold, a boundary between my world and something much darker, something that wanted me, needed me to step through. But the fear was overwhelming, the kind of terror that numbs your senses and makes you question your own sanity. I hesitated, caught between the need to know and the primal instinct to flee. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of voices demanding that I open the door. I could feel the weight of something behind it, pressing against the wood, waiting for me to give in, to let out. My breath caught in my throat, and my vision blurred as I finally pushed the door open, stepping into the unknown, into a darkness that swallowed me whole. As I stepped through the door, I was no longer in the mansion. The air changed instantly. It became colder, almost freezing, and the light from the hallway behind me vanished as the door closed with an echoing thud, leaving me in near darkness. I stood in what seemed to be a corridor, impossibly long and narrow, its walls covered in a strange, pulsating black substance that resembled tar, oozing and shifting like it was alive. The only light came from dim, flickering bulbs hanging above, their weak glow barely enough to illuminate my immediate surroundings. The sense of unease was overwhelming, a pressure building in my chest, as if the very air was pushing in on me, suffocating me. Each breath I took seemed to draw in the cold, damp essence of something ancient, something malevolent that had been lurking in the dark for far too long. I could hear the dripping again, but this time it was closer, more rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, echoing from deep within the corridor. As I moved forward, I noticed that the floor beneath my feet wasn't solid. It felt spongy, almost organic, giving slightly with each step, as though I was walking on something that was barely alive. The walls seemed to shift as I moved, the tar-like substance creating shapes, faces, hands, and hollow eyes that appeared for a moment before melting back into the darkness. The whispers returned, this time louder, and they were coming from all directions, a chorus of disembodied voices overlapping, whispering my name, urging me to keep moving, to come closer. The corridor seemed endless, stretching out far beyond what should have been possible. Panic rose in my throat as I realized I had no idea where I was or how to get out. The door behind me had vanished, leaving nothing but the pulsating walls, closing in, inch by inch. Suddenly, the flickering lights above began to sway, as though some invisible force had disturbed them. Shadows moved along the walls, shifting and dancing in grotesque patterns, forming figures that reached out towards me. I could hear footsteps now, not mine, but someone else's, slow, deliberate, echoing through the narrow space. They were coming from behind, growing louder, each step reverberating through my bones. I turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest, but all I could see was darkness, an impenetrable blackness that seemed to swallow the light, moving towards me like a living thing. I quickened my pace, almost stumbling, my feet sinking into the soft, yielding floor. The walls seemed to close in further, the tar dripping and oozing, reaching for me with long, tendril-like fingers. I could feel a presence now, something that was following me, something that had been waiting for me to step through that door. I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, something shifting, something crawling along the ceiling, its limbs long and unnatural, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It was watching me, its gaze locked onto mine, filled with a hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. My breathing became ragged, each inhalation a struggle against the panic that threatened to consume me. There was a door at the end of the corridor, just barely visible, its outline shimmering faintly in the darkness. I had no choice. I had to reach it, had to escape whatever was stalking me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, almost pleading now, and I could feel the air around me grow colder still, freezing my skin, numbing my fingers as I reached out towards the door. The footsteps behind me quickened, turning into a sprint, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. I could hear something breathing, a raspy, guttural sound that sent waves of terror through me. My hand closed around the doorknob, cold and slick with something wet. I turned it, throwing the door open, and stumbled through, slamming it shut behind me. The noise of the corridor ceased abruptly. The whispers, the footsteps, the rasping breath, all of it disappeared, leaving only silence. But as I stood there panting, trying to steady myself, I realized that the silence was even worse. It was heavy, oppressive, a void that seemed to swallow every sound I made. I was in a new room now, dimly lit by a single swinging bulb. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not only me, but something else. Shadows that moved independently, figures standing just out of sight, their eyes hollow and unblinking. And there, in the reflection, I saw it again, the door. Only this time, it was behind me, slightly ajar, and something was pushing it open. In the center of the room stood a tall, ornate mirror, unlike any of the others lining the walls. Its frame was carved with intricate symbols, twisting and spiraling, giving off an eerie glow that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. My reflection stared back at me, but there was something wrong, something deeply unsettling. The reflection wasn't moving as I did. It lagged, just a fraction of a second behind, like it was struggling to mimic my movements, as if it wasn't truly a reflection, but something else entirely. My face looked gaunt, my eyes hollow, and the faint glow from the symbols danced across my skin, casting unnatural shadows. I felt a deep chill as I took a step closer, my feet moving as if compelled by some unseen force. The air around the mirror seemed to ripple, distorting my reflection even further, and the whispers returned, softer now, almost gentle, coaxing me closer. The shadows in the other mirrors twisted and shifted, their forms elongating, their eyes fixed on me, growing darker and more menacing with each passing moment. My fingers touched the glass, and it was cold, freezing to the point of burning my skin. My reflection's lips twisted into a smile I wasn't making. Suddenly, the room began to change. The walls seemed to close in, the mirrors warping and bulging, as if the glass was alive, trying to break free from its frame. The figures in the reflections started to move, stepping out from their mirrored prisons, their forms flickering like smoke. I tried to pull my hand away from the mirror, but it felt like it was glued to the surface, an invisible force holding me there, binding me to whatever lay beyond. The whispers turned to hisses, sharp and venomous, and I could see my reflection's eyes blacken, a darkness that spread like ink, consuming its face until there was nothing left but two deep, empty voids. A sudden force pulled me forward, my face almost pressing against the glass, and in that instant, I saw something behind me, a figure tall and gaunt, with limbs too long and fingers that ended in sharp, claw-like points. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes were unmistakable, two hollow voids staring at me with a hunger that went beyond the physical. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my voice lost in the overwhelming terror that gripped me. The figure moved closer, its breath hot and rancid against my neck, and I could feel its fingers brushing against my shoulder, cold and skeletal. Panic surged through me, and I yanked my hand away from the mirror, stumbling back. The room was spinning, the mirrors reflecting not just me but countless versions of the figure, all reaching for me, their fingers clawing at the glass, their eyes filled with malice. I turned, desperate to find a way out, and there it was, the door, standing slightly ajar, the same faint, pulsating light spilling from the gap. But the figure was between me and the door, its head tilting unnaturally as it watched me, a low, guttural sound emanating from deep within its chest, a noise that was neither human nor animal. The light from the swinging bulb flickered, casting the room into a strobe of darkness and light, each flash showing the figure closer, its limbs contorting, twisting in impossible ways as it moved towards me. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, the fear rooting me to the spot. The whispers were deafening now, overlapping, shouting in a language I couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. They wanted me to open the door, to step through, to let whatever lay beyond claim me. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged for the door, my hand wrapping around the edge, and pulled it open. The light exploded outward, blinding me, and for a moment, the figure stopped, its form dissolving into the shadows as the light consumed it. I stumbled through, slamming the door behind me, my body shaking, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. I was back in my bedroom, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if it was trying to break free from my chest. The air was thick, oppressive, and the only sound was the relentless ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I glanced at the clock, 3:33 a.m., the same time as always. But the nightmare wasn't over. The dripping sound was still there, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the silence of my room. And then I saw it, a shadow, barely perceptible, standing in the corner, watching, waiting. The figure from the mirror had followed me, and as I blinked, it was gone, leaving behind only the chilling realization that whatever I had faced in that room was not just a dream. It was real, and it wasn't finished with me yet. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that door, feel the cold of the mirror, and sense the figure lurking in the shadows. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream, a terrifying nightmare, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. There was something real about it, something that clung to me, like a dark residue left behind by whatever malevolent force I had encountered. It was the dripping sound that unnerved me the most, even when I was awake. It seemed to follow me, echoing in the quiet moments, a constant reminder that something had crossed over with me. I couldn't let it go. I began searching for any clues that could explain what had happened, any mention of a door that appeared and disappeared, a mirror that trapped reflections, a figure that moved with impossible fluidity. I scoured obscure forums, read old books on hauntings and supernatural phenomena, and slowly, a pattern began to emerge. I found stories, whispered accounts of a door that appeared in strange places, leading people to places they had never seen before, places that haunted them, that marked them. People spoke of dreams that felt too real, of waking up with bruises and scratches, of the sound of dripping water that followed them long after the dreams had ended. One account, in particular, stood out. It was from a forum post made years ago, by someone who described an experience eerily similar to mine. They had seen the door in their dream, stepped through it, and encountered a room full of mirrors. They too had seen a figure, a dark, hollow-eyed presence that seemed to watch them from every reflection. The post ended abruptly, the author stating that they could no longer sleep, that they felt they were being watched, even during the day. There were no further posts from that user. Their account had gone silent, and attempts to contact them led to nothing. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. The more I read, the more the fear settled into my bones. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was something far worse, something that had claimed others before me. I began searching for information about the location I had seen in my dream, that sprawling, decaying mansion. I found an old newspaper article about a house on the outskirts of town, abandoned for decades, rumored to be cursed. The article mentioned strange occurrences: lights flickering at odd hours, figures seen in the windows, whispers heard by those who dared to approach. It was the same house, I was certain of it. The details matched too perfectly. The decaying walls, the endless corridors, the oppressive air. It was as if the house itself had reached out to me, pulling me into its grasp. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to visit the house. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sky overcast, casting a dim, gray light over the landscape. The mansion loomed before me, its windows dark, its walls covered in ivy and decay. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something metallic, something that turned my stomach. I stood at the gate, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the door, the very door that had haunted my dreams. It looked old, cracked, but there was something about it, something that made it feel alive, like it was waiting for me. I pushed open the gate, the metal creaking loudly, the sound echoing through the empty grounds. With each step towards a mansion, the sense of dread grew, a weight pressing down on my chest. I reached the front door, hesitating for a moment before pushing it open. The inside was exactly as I had seen in my dream: the long hallway, the flickering light, the damp, rotting walls. Every detail was the same, and as I stood there, the dripping sound returned, louder now, echoing from somewhere deep within the house. I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the silence, the floor creaking beneath me. The air grew colder with each step, the sense of being watched intensifying. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of my vision, shapes that moved just out of sight, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. The hallway twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the house, until I reached a room at the end, a room with a door slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from within. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, except for a small table in the center, and on it lay an old, leather-bound journal. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the leather cool and smooth beneath my fingers. I opened it, the pages yellowed with age, filled with handwritten notes and drawings. The first few entries were mundane, descriptions of the house and its history. But as I read further, the tone changed. The writer spoke of dreams, of a door that appeared to them, of a figure that watched them from the shadows. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting erratic, the words barely legible. They spoke of the mirror, of seeing their own reflection smile when they were not, of the figure growing closer each night. And then, there it was, a symbol, drawn repeatedly in the margins, the same symbol I had seen on the ornate mirror in my dream. My heart pounded as I stared at it, a cold realization settling over me. This was no coincidence. The figure, the door, the mirror, they were all connected, part of something far older and far darker than I could comprehend. I felt a presence then, a cold breath on the back of my neck, and I turned slowly, the fear gripping me, my body frozen. There, in the doorway, stood the figure, its eyes too deep, empty voids, its form shrouded in shadows that seemed to writhe and twist around it. It was real, no longer confined to the dream, no longer a figment of my imagination. It had followed me here, crossed over into my world, and as it took a step towards me, I knew that this was only the beginning. The nightmare had become reality, and there was no waking up from it. The decision to return to the mansion was not one I made lightly. Every fiber of my being screamed against it. Every instinct warned me to stay away, but the questions were relentless. They gnawed at my mind, whispering doubts and fears that would not let me rest. I had to know what was happening, what this place wanted from me. There was a darkness here, and it had latched on to me, refusing to let go until I confronted it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows, I found myself standing once more at the gate of the cursed mansion. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, a cold wind rustling through the dead leaves that littered the path. The sky was dark, overcast, as if the world itself was mourning what I was about to do. I pushed open the gate, the creak echoing like a groan of protest, and stepped onto the path leading to the front door. Every step felt like a march toward my own doom, the weight of the unseen eyes pressing down on me, their gaze unblinking and relentless. The door stood ajar, as if expecting me, welcoming me back into the darkness. As I crossed the threshold, the familiar stench of mold and rot filled my nostrils, and the temperature dropped instantly. The oppressive cold seemed to wrap around me like a shroud, each breath visible in the dim light, fogging the air before me. The hallway stretched out, longer than I remembered, the flickering bulbs casting grotesque shadows that seemed to twist and contort on the walls. I moved forward, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath, my ears straining to catch any hint of movement. It was too quiet, the silence unnatural, broken only by the faint dripping sound that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I wasn't alone. Of that, I was certain. The shadows moved in the periphery of my vision, shifting like liquid, taking on forms that seemed almost human but always dissolved before I could fully make them out. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in my ears, the fear building with every step. I could feel it, that presence, the same one from my dreams, watching, waiting. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, its dark energy pulsing through the walls, feeding on my fear. Deeper into the mansion, I found a door that I hadn't seen before. It was old, its wood splintered, and there were deep scratches running across its surface, as if something had tried desperately to claw its way out. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, a sense of dread washing over me. As the door creaked open, a staircase was revealed, descending into complete darkness. The air that wafted up was ice cold, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of earth and decay. I knew I should turn back, that nothing good could come from descending those stairs, but something pulled me forward, a compulsion, a need to understand, to confront whatever was waiting for me. Step by step, I descended, the darkness swallowing me whole, the light from the hallway above fading until it was nothing but a distant memory. I fumbled for my flashlight, the weak beam barely piercing the blackness, revealing only the next few feet of the narrow, stone-walled passage. The walls were damp, covered in moss, and the air grew thicker the further I went, each breath a struggle. The dripping sound was louder here, echoing off the stone, but it wasn't water. I could smell it now, the metallic tang of blood. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a cavernous space, the flashlight flickering as if struggling against the darkness. My heart nearly stopped as the beam landed on something in the middle of the room, a figure, hunched and still. It was the old man, Silas, the one I had met during my previous visit. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Around him, symbols were carved into the stone floor, the same symbols I had seen in the mirror, glowing faintly, pulsating with a sickly light that seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. Panic surged through me, my body frozen as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The symbols seemed to shift, the lines writhing, and I could hear the whispers again, louder, echoing off the stone walls, overlapping, their meaning just beyond my grasp. Silas's eyes moved then, locking onto mine, his mouth opening slowly, as if to speak, but the only sound that came out was a guttural, rasping breath, a noise that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. His hand twitched, pointing towards something behind me, and a chill unlike anything I had ever felt washed over me. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight swinging through the darkness, and there it was, the figure from my dreams. Its form was more solid now, no longer just shadow, but something real. Its eyes too deep, empty voids that seemed to draw in the light, consuming it. It moved towards me, its limbs unnaturally long, each step slow, deliberate, the ground beneath it seeming to writhe, as if alive. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move, the terror rooting me in place. The whispers grew to a deafening roar, the symbols on the ground flaring with light, and the figure reached out, its fingers inches from my face. In that instant, something shifted within me, a memory, something from my past, something I had forgotten, a choice I had made, a promise I had broken. It was as if the figure was showing me, forcing me to remember. The memory hit me like a wave, and suddenly I knew. The door, the figure, the darkness, it was all connected to something I had done, something I had unleashed. With every ounce of strength I had left, I turned and ran, stumbling up the stairs, my flashlight flickering, the whispers chasing me, the figure's presence pressing closer with every step. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, slamming it shut behind me, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The mansion seemed to groan around me, the walls closing in, the very air vibrating with the energy of the darkness I had awoken. I had come seeking answers, and now I knew the truth. This darkness was not just a part of the house, it was a part of me, and there was no escaping it. The house groaned with the weight of what it contained, a monstrous resonance that echoed through the walls as I fled down the winding corridor. The darkness was no longer confined. It moved like a living thing, a presence that pulsated with malevolence, breathing down my neck, reaching with invisible fingers. I could feel it closing in, the cold intensifying, an icy grip wrapping around my chest, each breath harder to draw. The whispers were louder than ever, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from every direction, blending together in a dissonant harmony of fear, calling my name, urging me to give in. My path twisted and turned, the once familiar corridors of the mansion now foreign, as if the house itself had shifted to keep me from escaping. Doors that should have led to the outside instead opened into more darkened rooms, each one more decrepit and decayed than the last, the air suffocating with the scent of mold, rot, and something far worse, something old, something ancient. My flashlight flickered, its beam weak and sputtering, and in that intermittent light, I caught glimpses of the figure, always just a few steps behind, its limbs too long, its movements a grotesque mimicry of human grace. I stumbled into a large room at the end of a corridor, the door slamming shut behind me, sealing me in. My breath came in short, desperate gasps, and I scanned the room, my eyes wide with terror. The walls were covered in faded, torn wallpaper, and the floor was littered with broken furniture, shattered glass, and in the center, something that made my blood run cold, a large, ornate chest carved with the same shifting symbols I had seen throughout my nightmares. It sat there, an unnatural glow emanating from the cracks, the air around it vibrating with an energy that seemed to pull at me, drawing me closer. I hesitated, but I could feel the presence behind the door, pushing against it, the wood groaning as though it would give way at any moment. I knew I had no choice. Slowly, I moved toward the chest, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if an invisible weight pressed down on me, resisting my every movement. The symbols on the chest seemed to pulse in rhythm with my racing heart, and as I knelt beside it, I could feel a strange warmth emanating from the wood, a heat that spread through my body, lulling me into a sense of false security. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they touched the lid, and instantly, the whispers stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing in on me, the weight of it almost too much to bear. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made my heart stop. A mirror, lying at the bottom, its surface dark and rippling like water. My reflection stared back at me. But it was not just me. It was the figure standing behind me, its hollow eyes staring into mine, its mouth twisting into a grotesque smile that spread wider, too wide, splitting its face. I tried to look away, but my gaze was locked on the reflection, unable to break free. Suddenly, the figure moved, its hand reaching up, the long, skeletal fingers pressing against my shoulder, and I felt it, an icy grip, a cold that shot through my body, freezing me in place. I watched, paralyzed, as the reflection began to change. The room around me shifted, the walls warping, the ceiling stretching upwards, twisting and contorting as if the entire structure was alive, writhing in pain. The figure's face moved closer to mine in the mirror, its empty eyes filling my vision, until there was nothing but darkness. And then, it spoke, its voice a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing inside my head, the words dripping with malice. "You opened the door, and now you belong to us." The words reverberated through me, and I could feel the cold spreading, the darkness from the mirror seeping out, enveloping me, pulling me in. I struggled, every muscle in my body screaming for me to move, to run, but I was rooted in place, my reflection slowly fading into the black void, replaced by the figure, its hollow eyes now staring out from where mine should have been. Panic surged through me, a wave of pure, primal terror, and with a strength I didn't know I had, I tore my gaze away, slamming the lid of the chest shut, breaking the connection. The whispers returned, louder now, angry, a cacophony of rage that filled the room, the air vibrating with their fury. The door behind me burst open, the figure rushing towards me, its limbs contorting, its mouth open in a silent scream, and I knew I had only moments left. My eyes darted around the room, and then I saw it, a small, faded door in the corner, almost hidden behind a broken cabinet. Without thinking, I ran towards it, throwing the door open and plunging into the darkness beyond. The air was cold, the space narrow, and I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps echoing, each one closer than the last. I ran, the walls closing in, the whispers growing louder, until suddenly I was falling, the floor disappearing beneath my feet, the world spinning around me. I awoke in a hospital bed, the fluorescent lights harsh against my eyes, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils. My body ached, every muscle sore, and as I tried to sit up, I realized I was not alone. The room was empty, but I could feel it, that presence, still with me, lurking just out of sight. The nurse who came to check on me said I had been found unconscious in an abandoned house, no explanation for how I got there or why I was in that state. But I knew. The door, the figure, the darkness. It was still with me, still waiting, and the nightmare was far from over. Even now, as I sit here, recounting what happened, I can see it. The shadows move just a little too much. The reflection in the window shifts when I am still. The dripping sound echoes in the quiet of the night, a reminder that the darkness is always there, always watching. And I know that one day, I will have to face it again. The door may have closed, but it is not locked. It is waiting, and when it opens, I fear there will be no escaping it. The days after I woke in the hospital were a blur of confusion and growing dread. I tried to resume my life, to convince myself that everything I had experienced was just a fever hallucination, a trick of my exhausted mind. But the feeling that something had followed me back was impossible to ignore. Even in the bright light of day, I could feel it, a constant, gnawing sense of being watched, as if eyes that I couldn't see were tracking my every movement. The house, the mirror, that figure. They had not let me go. They had simply allowed me to leave, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all just beginning. At night, the nightmares returned, more vivid than ever. The dripping sound, the cold whisper of my name, the shadows twisting just out of reach, each one a reminder that I was still connected to that place. I would wake in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, the darkness of my room feeling oppressive, alive. There were moments when I could swear I saw the outline of the door in shadows, barely there, as if it was waiting for the right moment to reappear. The clock would read 3:33 a.m. every time, without fail, the soft ticking growing louder until it echoed in my head like a countdown to something inevitable. One night, as I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, near the foot of my bed, there was a symbol, etched into the paint, glowing faintly, just like the ones I had seen on the chest in the mansion. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of my tired eyes, but it remained, pulsing softly, as if it was alive. A chill ran down my spine, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, the shadows on the walls growing darker, longer, creeping towards me. I could hear the whispers again, faint and distant, but unmistakable. They were calling me back, and I knew that whatever had begun that night in the mansion was far from over. The next day, I tried to find answers. I returned to the forums, searched for anything that might explain what was happening to me, but the threads were gone deleted, as if they had never existed. The usernames I had seen, the stories that had matched mine, they had all disappeared. It was as if the darkness was erasing any trace of itself, hiding in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I tried contacting Silas's family, hoping to find some closure, but they were evasive, frightened. They told me Silas had vanished weeks before, and that strange things had been happening in their home ever since. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't just a haunting. It was something far more insidious. In a moment of desperation, I sought out an old occult bookstore on the outskirts of town. The place was dusty and dimly lit, filled with the scent of aged paper and forgotten secrets. The owner, an old woman with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me, listened as I recounted my story. She said little, but when I mentioned the door and the figure, her expression darkened. She led me to a back room, pulling an ancient, leather-bound book from a high shelf. She opened it to a page that made my stomach drop, a drawing of the door identical to the one from my dreams, and beside it, a depiction of the figure, its hollow eyes staring up at me from the page. She called it the threshold, a doorway that existed between worlds, a passage that should never be opened. She said that those who saw it were marked, that the door chose them, feeding off their fears, drawing them deeper until there was no escape. I asked her how to stop it, how to break free, but she only shook her head, her eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of countless others who had asked the same question. She handed me a small, worn talisman, a symbol carved into its surface. "It won't stop it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but it may buy you time." That night, I placed the talisman under my pillow, hoping for some respite, some small measure of peace. But the nightmares were worse than ever. I was back in the mansion, the walls closing in, the mirrors reflecting not just me, but countless versions of the figure, all reaching for me, their hollow eyes filled with a hunger that seemed endless. I ran, but no matter where I turned, the door was always there, opening to darkness, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. When I awoke, the talisman was gone, and the symbol was etched into the floor beside my bed, glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. Now, as I sit here, recounting everything that has happened, I feel the presence growing stronger. The air around me is cold, the shadows in the room seem to shift, and I know that it's only a matter of time before the door appears again. I can hear the faint dripping, closer now, and the whispers. They're no longer distant. They're here, in the room with me, calling my name, urging me to open the door, to step through, and let the darkness take me. This is not just a story, it's a warning. The door is real, and once it finds you, it will never let you go. I don't know how much longer I have, but if you're watching this, if you've ever seen the door in your dreams, if you've ever felt the cold grip of something you can't explain, be careful. The darkness is patient, and it waits for the moment when you're too weak to resist. If you're drawn to these mysteries like I was, if you feel the pull of the unknown, subscribe to the channel. Share your stories, your theories, anything that might help. Because sometimes, the nightmares don't end when we wake up. Sometimes, they're only just beginning, And whatever happened in that mansion, whatever followed me back, it's still out there, waiting for the next person to open the door.